Wagwan, good afternoon, and welcome to Consular Conversations Live from the U.S. Embassy in Kingston, Jamaica. My name is Nikisha, and I'm your host for today. I'm joined by my colleagues, Vice Consul Brandon and Vice Consul Anthony, and they will join me in discussing our today's topics of discussion, which are overseas voting and fraud prevention. Also, I want to welcome you, our audience, to today's discussion. Thank you for tuning in. I want to encourage you all to share this live stream with your followers on all of our streaming platforms. We're on Facebook, YouTube, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. Our handle is at US Embassy JA. And I would like to remind you all that you can submit questions directly through these platforms. So through Facebook, through YouTube, X, formerly known as Twitter, and through Instagram. However, please note that we cannot answer any specific questions about your individual cases or applications, as we don't have access to detailed case information, and also you're entitled to your privacy. But any other questions that come in, we'll try our best to answer them. If you do need specific assistance, you can also visit our website, usembassy.gov.jm, and use our navigator tool to direct your inquiry to the appropriate department. Now, before we dive into today's discussion, I'd like to ask our guests, Anthony and Brandon, to introduce yourselves. Just tell us a little bit about, yourself, your background, and the work that you do here at the embassy.
Me first?
Go for it.
Good afternoon. My name is Brandon. I work in our fraud prevention unit in the consular section at the U.S. Embassy. And, we really focus on protecting the integrity of the visa, the U.S. visa, and the U.S. passport as travel products that we issue. And we make sure that travelers are applying, aware of what they need to apply, and using the products in compliance with U.S. laws and regulations.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. Wagwan, Jamaica. I'm Anthony Bird. I'm a Vice Consul in the American Citizen Services Unit here at the U.S. Embassy in Kingston, Jamaica, where I work on, surprisingly enough, American Citizen Services. That can be everything from renewing a passport, registering the birth of a U.S. citizen born abroad, and assisting U.S. citizens in various problems that they might have in Jamaica. I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Nikisha.
Thank you both, and again, welcome. Now I want us to focus specifically on overseas voting. As many of you know, the United States is heading into its 60th quadrennial presidential election. This election campaign has already been historic in many ways, and it has captured the attention of people around the world, including here in Jamaica. Now, please note that this is not to endorse any particular candidate, but to ensure that you know how to get your vote out. So Anthony is here to explain to us how American citizens living in Jamaica can cast their ballots in the upcoming presidential election.
Thank you, Nikisha. Yeah, as Nikisha mentioned, there is an important presidential election coming up on November 5th. And we want you to know that American citizens living in Jamaica can and should vote in U.S. elections. But in order to do so, you need to request an absentee ballot. And you can do that by going to www.fvap.gov. That's the Federal Voting Assistance Program. I'm going to say that again. It's fvap.gov. I will note that if you haven't done so, we encourage you to go to the website and request that absentee ballot now. Different jurisdictions in different states and counties in the United States have different regulations and timelines. So it would be to your benefit to go ahead and request that ballot now if you haven't. Another important note, you cannot vote at the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. Embassy and our consular agency in Montego Bay and in the Cayman Islands are not polling places. All right, you must vote via absentee ballot. You can, however, drop your ballot off at the embassy in Kingston or our consular agency in Montego Bay or in the Caymans, and we'll mail it for you free of charge. All right, keep in mind, though, it must have, 1, your full return address clearly written on the top left corner of the envelope, and a posted page envelope design on the front. You can generate all of these things at fvap.gov, the website that I mentioned earlier. And just to make sure that your vote is heard, we encourage you to aim to drop off your ballot for mailing by October 4th. Okay, that's just in a couple of weeks. So again, we encourage you, if you haven't registered, if you haven't requested that ballot, please do so.
Thank you, Anthony. So how long does it take for a person to receive their absentee ballot once they request it?
Yeah, once you request your ballot via FVAP, the different jurisdictions in the United States aim to send out those absentee ballots about 45 days prior to the election. Um, if you request a ballot by email, oftentimes that should arrive right away. And keep in mind that, again, different jurisdictions have different rules. So sometimes it might not be necessary to actually mail back your ballot. Sometimes you can send it in via email. So be sure to check the specific regulations for the district in which you're going to be voting in the United States.
Thank you. Now, what if someone doesn't receive their absentee ballot in time for the general election? Can they still vote?
Sure, of course. What you do is you can use the federal write-in ballot. Again, that's available at fvap.gov. This is a write-in ballot, which is just for federal elections. But if you don't receive your ballot in time and you're worried that your vote is not going to count, we encourage you to go to FVAP, request a federal write-in ballot, and then you can mail it in according to the directions on the website.
Thank you once again, Anthony. We hope you all register and get out your vote. Now, let's move to fraud prevention. Fraud prevention is an integral part of the work that we do here at Embassy Kingston within our consular section. As consular professionals, we are dedicated to facilitating legitimate travel to the United States, whether it's for tourism, business, study, cultural exchange, and so much more. Now, this includes both detecting and deterring applicants from committing fraud, as well as assisting in protecting Jamaican citizens from scams and exploitation. Now, Brandon, can you tell us a bit more about fraud prevention in relation to B visas?
Sure. Sure. So this month we wanted to focus on how to travel compliantly on your B1, B2 visa, how to report a visa lost or stolen, and how to report visa misuse. So as most of you may already know, a B1, B2 visa is a visa for visiting the United States for pleasure and business purposes. So some examples of reasons you may want to apply for and use a B visa is to go on vacation or engage in tourism activities in the United States or attend business meetings or work conferences. These are generally short stays, a couple weeks at a time perhaps, and you have a specific purpose that lines up with the B visa before you take your trip. Some examples of things that you would not be able to do when you're in the United States on a B visa would be work or study. It's important to note that in order to travel compliantly on a B visa, you want to make sure that when you enter the United States and you have your interview with the Customs and Border Patrol agent, you make sure to note your admit until date or your AUD. That's the date that you're allowed to remain in the United States. You can't remain beyond that date. If you do, that's what's considered an overstay. So to make sure you travel compliantly, you want to make sure that you return to your home country, whether that's Jamaica or another country, before that date passes. When it comes to compliant travel on a B visa, you just want to make sure that the purpose of your visit lines up with the permitted activities in B status. So those are all listed on our website in more fulsome detail. But as I said, it's usually for tourism or business purposes. And you want to be cautious that all of your activities in the United States line up with those reasons. Any travel that's very prolonged, or if you have patterns of travel that may indicate a misuse of the visa class, you could encounter problems when you go to renew that visa or upon a future interview with a Customs and Border Patrol agent. They may have additional questions for you. If you have very long stays on the visa and you travel in a way that demonstrates weak ties to your home country. In order to qualify for the B visa, the main requirement is to overcome the presumption of immigrant intent. And so if you can no longer overcome that presumption, you may encounter some issues when you renew the visa with a consular officer, or as I said, future visits and encounters with Customs and Border Patrol. I can cover lost and stolen visas as well.
Yes, go ahead.
So if you lose or if you have your visa, your passport stolen, you can contact us at kingstonfpu@state.gov to report the theft. The best thing to do in those instances is to file a police report where the loss or theft occurs to document what happened, and then to send us a copy of that report and all of the data that you have in your passport on the bio page, and any information you may have about the visa. It's always a good rule of thumb to keep photocopies of those important documents in a safe place when you travel, so that if you do lose them, you have something to refer to when you need to replace your travel document or your US visa in the future.
Thank you,
So-
Brandon. I do have a question
Sure.
regarding lost stolen visas. So if someone does lose their visa and reports it to the US Embassy, do they automatically get a new one or do they have to reapply for a visa?
So every time a visa is printed, it's the result of a new application, whether that's your first time applying for a visa, if it's a renewal, or if it's to replace a visa that was lost or stolen. So if you do lose or have your visa stolen, you do need to go through the regular process that you went through before of filling out that application, paying the fee, and attending the interview.
Thank you, Brandon. And now, what are some of the consequences of visa misuse?
So some of the consequences of misusing your visa, they range, in severity, depending on the context. But as I said before, if it's found that you did not travel compliantly with the visa that you held, you could encounter issues with renewing that visa. You may be denied future visas. And depending on the type of misuse, it could carry heavier penalties or ineligibilities, such as misrepresentation, which is a lifelong ineligibility for a US visa, or any other ineligibilities that apply to the activity that was classified as misuse.
Thank you, Brandon. So please, folks, do not misuse your visas. Do not engage in visa fraud. And take that from our fraud prevention officer here. Now, we're at the halfway point of our program, so we want to open the floor to questions from our audience. So please, as I mentioned earlier, you can send in those questions via Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, and YouTube. Now, let's see, I think we already have some questions. So Kardashian on Facebook asks, how can I find out why I was refused a visa? Who would like to take this one?
I can take it. So that's a good question. There can be many reasons you're refused a visa, depending on the type of visa you're applying for, and it can sometimes be for multiple reasons. But in all cases, the consular officer will inform you verbally and give you written documentation of the reason for the visa refusal at the end of your interview. So it's usually told to you at the end why the visa is refused, and then you'll also be given written documentation which further details the reason for the refusal.
Thank you, Brandon. Now we have a question from John at X, and I will direct this one to you, Anthony. If I'm a green card holder, can I vote at the US Embassy?
So that's a good question. So two things is one, you cannot vote at the US Embassy. The US Embassy and our consular agencies in Montego Bay and the Caymans are not polling places. So you cannot vote there. So don't queue up on election day expecting to cast a ballot. If you are a US citizen and you need to vote, you need to request an absentee ballot. And again, voting is a privilege reserved for US citizens. So in general, green card holders cannot cast ballots.
Thank you, Anthony. We have another question coming from Sandra on Facebook. She wants to know, if someone is working in the US on their tourist visa, how does one report that to the US Embassy?
So if you suspect that someone is misusing their visa and you'd like to file a report, you can send us an inquiry at kingstonfpu@state.gov. That's Kingston FPU, which stands for Fraud Prevention Unit, at state.gov, and we can look into it further. All tips are confidential, and we don't share any of that information outside of the Fraud Prevention Unit.
Thank you, Brandon. And now Maureen from YouTube wants to know, well, she lives in the Cayman Islands, but is a US citizen. How does she register to vote?
Yeah, so if you are living in the Cayman Islands or Jamaica or anywhere outside of the continental United States and you need to register to vote, you do that through your local jurisdiction. That would be the address at which you last lived in the United States. So let's say you're from New Jersey and you live in a particular county in New Jersey, you would register to vote with the election office in that county, right? And then in order to vote, you need to request from that municipality, the county that you previously lived in, New Jersey, via an absentee ballot. And again, you can do that through the Federal Voting Assistance Program at fvap.gov. Just another note, Nikisha, if it's okay. I know we have a lot of U.S. citizens that live in Jamaica and in the Caymans that maybe are a little older and are not particularly adept with things like going online and requesting absentee ballots. You can always send us an email at kingstonacs@state.gov and let us know the troubles that you're having, and we'll work with you to make sure that you get the absentee ballot.
Thank you. Now, as I'm waiting for additional questions to come in, I want to ask you two, are there any things, any highlights or things that you feel to mention in your talking points that you'd like to share with our audience?
I think I covered everything, but I would just emphasize that if you are coming to apply for a visa, make sure that you're aware of which visa lines up with the reason you'd like to travel. So you can find that out by going onto our website and using our Visa Navigator tool. That will show you which visa you need to apply for in order to, for example, study in the United States at a university, or work on a temporary basis, or go on vacation. Those are all different types of visas that you need to apply for. And you want to make sure that your activities in the United States line up with the visa that you use when you enter at the port of entry.
And
Thanks, Brandon. And Nikisha, for the audience out there, it is worth bearing in mind and emphasizing that if you're interested in voting in the upcoming election in the United States and you have not yet requested an absentee ballot, you should do that now. Again, timelines in different jurisdictions vary. They vary by state, they vary by county. So the best way to make sure that your vote is heard is to go online today to FVAP and request your absentee ballot.
thank you. And speaking of requesting absentee ballots, Fred from YouTube wants to know where he can find voting information on the U.S. Embassy's website.
Yeah, if you just go to the U.S. Embassy's website and scroll through to American Citizen Services, you'll find information there on voting and, importantly, links to resources in the United States, including the Federal Voting Assistance Program, which is going to have more detailed information on voting, again, in your particular jurisdiction, the place where you last resided in the United States.
Thank you, Anthony. We have another question coming from X, and it's from Sonia. She says that her cousin is in Jamaica right now and she lost her green card. How can she return to the US? What if she lost her other ID documents because of theft?
Sure, that's a great question, and something that happens all too often. If you are a green card holder and you lost your green card, you are going to need a document from us in order to enter the United States. That document is called a boarding foil, and you can find information on our embassy website on how to request an appointment for a boarding foil. Basically, you come in and you do an interview. If you don't have any documents with you, I will verify your green card status. And then once the fees are paid and if everything works out, we'll go ahead and issue a boarding foil, which looks like a visa, which will be affixed in your passport, your Jamaican passport or other passport if you're a different nationality. And that's the document you need to enter the United States.
Thank you, Anthony. We also have a question from Romain on Facebook. He asks, how long does one need to wait before reapplying for a visa?
I assume you mean after being denied?
Yes.
So there are different criteria, depending on the reason for the denial. For example, if you traveled to the United States and you were turned around at the port of entry and you were denied entry and sent back to your home country, sometimes that carries a bar on reapplication. Usually the Customs and Border Patrol agent will give you information about any bar that applies, such as a 3-year or a 5-year bar. But if it's, an interview at the U.S. Embassy and you're refused under Section 214B for failure to overcome the presumption of immigrant intent, usually we give you a paper that explains the law in further detail, and you'll notice on there it talks about reapplication. For a refusal like that, there's no bar on reapplication, so there's not a specific period of time you need to wait to reapply. You can reapply at any time. However, we do ask that you take into account the reason for the refusal, and if it was because you didn't overcome the presumption of immigrant intent, you didn't overcome 214B, as we say, then you might want to read that information we give you in further detail and wait until your circumstances change so that you can qualify for the visa.
Thank you, Brandon. So we are almost at the end of our program, but we have time for one more question. Maggie on Facebook asks, how long does it take to get back your passport when you have an interview waiver for a minor? This is a non-immigrant visa unit or non-immigrant visa question.
Can you repeat it?
How long does it take to get back your passport when you have an interview waiver for a minor? So if they've applied via interview waiver, how long does it take to get the passport back?
I believe our wait times for interview waivers are only a few days, maybe a week at this point, but you can check our updated wait times by going to our website. Those are updated periodically, and they do fluctuate depending on whether we're in a busy or slow travel season. So those wait times are always, updated. You can check them out there.
All right. Thank you, Brandon. And once again, thank you both. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Anthony. We are now at the end of our program. And we also want to thank you, our audience, for tuning in and for asking such great questions. Thank you for the informative commentary that you provided. And we hope you all join us next month for our next Consular Conversations Live. That will take place on Wednesday, October 16th at 1 p.m. And the topic is overseas voting and U.S. citizen holiday travel. So if you're interested in those topics, please tune in. Once again, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.